Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. My name is Mohammed Saleh. To be America's enemy is dangerous, but to be America's friend can be fatal. Henry Kissinger, the former American Secretary of State, who in many ways dominated the American foreign policy for decades, is credited to have said these words. A Trump storm is sweeping through the White House, and Biden's earlier policy of backing the Ukrainian war effort to the hilt has been turned on its head. Donald Trump is playing hardball with Kiev. The American president has called Volodymyr Zelensky to be a dictator and has even blamed Ukraine, a country that was invaded in 2022, as being responsible for the Russian invasion. Ukrainians are feeling a bitter sense of betrayal. In fact, Volodymyr Zelensky has gone on record to state that Kiev giving up its nuclear weapons as part of the Budapest Memorandum in 1994 was a mistake. Donald Trump has been openly talking of doing a deal with Russia without the Ukrainians even being present at the table. So after 3 long years of fighting and relentless bloodletting, how close are we to see an end to this war? And when the dust settles, how confident will the European NATO allies be of America's security cover for the NATO allies? Our next report gets you the details. It is 3 years since Russia began its invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine has lost 20% of its territory. Tens of thousands of soldiers have been killed on either side, and yet the war is far from over. With the change of guard at the White House, the American support for the Ukrainian war effort has dried up. Washington now looks more keen on patching up its relationship with Moscow. But on the ground in Kiev, there has been no let-up in the intensity of the war. This video from the 20th of February shows a barrage of Russian drones over the skies in Kiev. In Kherson, a Russian missile hit what Ukraine described as a residential building in which about 6 people suffered serious injuries. On the 22nd of February, Moscow claims to have captured 2 more Ukrainian settlements in the Donetsk region. Russia insists its motive for this war is simple. It wants to push back against the expanding frontiers of NATO. And NATO membership was a carrot that was dangled in front of Kiev to set aside any semblance of neutrality despite Ukraine's geostrategic position. So when Russia sent in its tanks and invaded Ukraine in February 2022, the entire strategy for the defense of Ukraine rested on the free flow of NATO weapons and money. But this is what the current American president has to say about the Ukraine war now.
But think of it, a modestly successful comedian. President Zelensky talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that basically couldn't be won, that never had to start and never would have started if I was president, not even a chance, and it didn't start for 4 years.
But the American president doesn't stop there. Mixing domestic politics and foreign policy is never a good recipe.
Every city is being demolished. They look like a demolition site, every single one of them. And the only thing he was really good at was playing Joe Biden like a fiddle. He played him like a fiddle. That's an expression we use, yes, sir, to say that he's pretty easy. A dictator without elections.
The mood in Ukraine has soured. In 1994, Ukraine, under international pressure, had given up its nuclear weapons as part of the Budapest Memorandum in exchange of security guarantees from the United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia. Ukraine joined NATO's Partnership for Peace in 1994. The NATO-Ukraine Commission was set up in 1997. A NATO-Ukraine action plan was put in place in 2002. And in 2005, Ukraine entered into what was called NATO's Intensified Dialogue Program. In February 2014, Viktor Yanukovych was ousted from power in Kiev in what was described as the Ukrainian Revolution, resulting in Russia's military action leading to the annexation of Crimea. Some in Ukraine now believe that Kiev has sleepwalked into this position, following the dangled carrot of closer ties with the West and a chance to be a part of the NATO military alliance.
It's a human disease. How can you put it? We have a president whom we support. During the war, we are all united. We are Ukrainians. I support Ukraine. I support our president. What Trump said is nonsense. Judging by his conclusions, his statements, it's very unpleasant. The head of the state cannot behave like this. It is a crime. What he said is nonsense.
Within Europe, there is a greater realization that the security calculus of our current world order is changing.
Regarding Ukraine, Europe and the world now stand at a crossroads. How the war against Ukraine will end affects and shapes security across Europe for generations to come. We take this very, very seriously. Together, the European Union and European NATO countries have shown 3 years of strength and unity. Much better and far more than most expected when Russia attacked Ukraine. We will continue to support Ukraine.
Trump makes no bones about the fact that Ukraine does not hold any cards. But the war in Ukraine has exposed the limits of American power. The possibility of a deal to end the Ukraine war without consultations with Kiev looks very real. So as Zelensky tries hard to get some elbow room, the dangling carrot of a NATO military alliance's membership appears to have pushed Ukraine into a lonely corner, fighting a war without any further American help. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, Africa's second largest country, the M23 rebels, supported by the Rwandan Defense Forces, have made significant gains in recent weeks. In what is turning out to be a political embarrassment for the Congolese president, Felix Tshisekedi, the M23 rebels have overwhelmed the Congolese army on the battlefield. Cities of Goma and Bukavu in the mineral-rich eastern Congo have fallen in quick succession to the M23 rebels, stoking fears of a regional conflagration. Though Kigali has repeatedly denied any involvement in the conflict, the United States on the 20th of February sanctioned a Rwandan government minister over his support for the M23 rebel group. While anxiety mounts on the home front, the Congolese president, on a quest to garner support, has so far returned empty-handed from his trips abroad to Angola and also the Munich Security Conference. Our next report gets you the details.
For more than 3 decades, the mineral-rich Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo has been driven by conflict. More than 120 rebel groups have been fighting with the Congolese forces for power, land and valuable mineral resources estimated to be worth $24 trillion. Preeminent among these armed groups is the M23 or the March 23 movement, a largely Tutsi rebel group linked with the neighboring Rwanda. Though Kigali denies direct military involvement in the conflict, UN experts last year had claimed that some 4,000 Rwandan defense forces were operating alongside the M23 rebels and in fact had de facto control over the group. Kigali is accused by Kinshasa of seeking to profit from the region's abundant natural resources, such as gold and coltan, a metallic ore considered vital in manufacturing of mobile phones and laptops. Refuting these allegations, Kigali maintains that its national security is under threat. For armed groups, in particular the FDLR, created by former Hutu leaders in the 1994 Rwandan genocide against Tutsis. Following more than 3 years of fighting, the M23 rebels have inflicted a succession of setbacks on the Congolese army in recent weeks. With a brief span of 3 weeks, in a lightning offensive, the M23 rebels have seized Goma and Bukavu, capitals of North and South Kivu provinces, respectively. The blitzkrieg has precipitated a rapidly escalating crisis, threatening the breakup of Africa's second largest country. On Sunday, the columns of M23 rebels entered the center of Bukavu, the second major city in eastern Congo, without much resistance by the Congolese forces. The African Union warned against the breakup of the Democratic Republic of Congo.
We are expressing grave concern, that is what our leaders did, on the situation in Eastern DRC, calling for immediate withdrawal of M23 and their supporters from all occupied towns and cities, including Goma Airport. Second, it's very critical that our leaders also emphasize what is fundamental to every member state of the African Union, the preservation and total respect of the sovereignty, political unity, and territorial integrity of Democratic Republic of Congo.
The fall of Bukavu, a city of 1 million people, gives the M23 total control of Lake Kivu, following its capture of Goma, capital of the neighboring province of North Kivu, late last month. Reportedly, a majority of the Congolese armed forces abandoned Bukavu on Friday, leaving behind weapons that were collected by civilians and bandits. The intense rebel campaign has rattled other nations, prompting international calls for a de-escalation and a ceasefire, which have been in vain so far. On Wednesday, the United Nations Security Council members met, hoping to avert the widening conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
It is imperative that this Council takes urgent and decisive steps to avert a wider regional war. I call on this Council to hold the perpetrators of human rights violations and abuses in the Democratic Republic of Congo accountable.
The time for theoretical debates is over. It is now time to uphold the very principles that define this institution: peace, security, and respect for international law. International law that is universal and applies to all, even while seeking African solutions. Standing by silently while civilians are killed is not a solution, and certainly not an African one.
On Thursday, the U.S. Treasury Department sanctioned Rwanda's Minister of State for regional integration. James Kabarebe, a former army chief considered central to his country's support for the M23 rebel group. M23 spokesperson Lawrence Kanyuka was also sanctioned, along with 2 companies that he controls in Britain and France. Terming the sanctions unjustified and unfounded, the Rwandan Foreign Ministry said that punitive measures, including sanctions, would make no contribution towards long-term security, peace, and stability in the region. Welcoming the US sanctions, the Democratic Republic of the Congo called for more such measures, with both sides refusing to budge from their position. Is the breakup of war-ravaged Democratic Republic of Congo on the cards?
More than 200 people were killed by the paramilitary rapid support forces in a 3-day-long assault in the southern White Nile state in the war-ravaged Sudan, a rights watchdog said on Tuesday. According to the group, field executions, abductions, forced disappearances and lootings have been carried out by the powerful paramilitary. Sudan's army-aligned Ministry of Foreign Affairs, however, has claimed that the figure of those who have been killed by the RSF is 433 people, including children. Ever since an all-out war broke out between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary rapid support forces in the middle of April in 2023, both sides have been accused of committing war crimes. 22 months into the Sudan war, tens of thousands of people have been killed and more than 12 million people have been uprooted in what the International Rescue Committee has dubbed as the biggest humanitarian crisis ever recorded. Our next report gets the details.
One of the 18 states of Sudan, the White Nile state, extends from just south of the capital Khartoum to the border with South Sudan. Following the eruption of an all-out war in mid-April 2023, the control over the White Nile state is divided by the warring parties. The Sudanese army is in control of the south, including the capital state Rabat, as well as 2 major cities and a key military base. The paramilitary RSF reigns supreme over the northern parts of the state, including the villages where reportedly the latest assault took place. According to the rights group, the Emergency Lawyers Network, which has documented human rights abuses during 22 months of fighting between the rival security forces for 3 days, RSF fighters subjected unarmed civilians of Al-Qadaris and Al-Kilwat villages to executions, kidnappings, forced disappearances, and looting. In addition to more than 200 people who were killed, hundreds more were wounded. Thousands attempted to flee the carnage across the White Nile, but many of them are reportedly missing and feared drowned after the RSF opened fire on them as well. The Sudanese army-backed government put the death toll at more than double the figure quoted by the emergency lawyers. In recent weeks, fighting has intensified as the Sudanese army attempts to reclaim full control of the capital, Khartoum. Given the unprecedented crisis in Sudan, characterized by mass displacement and the world's worst hunger catastrophe ever, top UN officials on Monday sought $6 billion for Sudan this year, an increase of more than 40% from last year. The biggest ever Sudan humanitarian appeal raised some eyebrows at a time when aid budgets around the world are under increasing strain.
A lot of us are probably sat here thinking, is the United Nations humanitarian system really launching its biggest ever Sudan humanitarian appeal, at a moment when the conversation is understandably about aid cuts and aid freezes and the toughest potential environment for humanitarian work in our living, working memory. This is a humanitarian crisis that is truly unprecedented in its scale and gravity, and it demands a response unprecedented in scale and intent. It's a crisis that is increasingly crossing Sudan's borders, threatening to destabilize neighbors in ways that risk being felt for generations to come.
The next day, the United Nations Human Rights Office released a report which stated that entrenched impunity is fueling gross human rights violations and abuses in Sudan. As the fighting spreads to more parts of the war-ravaged nation and involves additional armed actors, the need of the hour is broader international effort towards accountability to stem the flow of arms.
The continued and deliberate attacks on civilians and civilian objects, as well as summary executions, sexual violence, and other violations and abuses, underscore the utter failure by both parties to respect the rules and principles of international humanitarian and human rights law. Some of these acts may amount to war crimes. They must be investigated promptly and independently, with a view to bringing those responsible to justice.
About 25 million people, approximately half of the country's population, are in need of all types of humanitarian assistance. Famine conditions have been confirmed in at least 5 locations. What's worse, 70 to 80% of the health facilities have been rendered non-functional, and over 90% of school-aged children have been left with no access to formal education. Faced with such grim statistics, Africa's third largest country by size is looking at the world for a helping hand. Will the international community pay attention to the forgotten wars in Sudan?
On the 20th of February in the Czech Republic, a 16-year-old Czech national killed 2 women in a knife attack in a shop about 110 kilometers east of the capital city of Prague. The Czech police are yet to ascertain the motive of this attacker. And just 5 days prior to that, a 14-year-old boy was killed and 5 others were wounded in a deadly stabbing attack in southern Austria on the 15th of February. The suspect, a 23-year-old Syrian asylum seeker who was reportedly radicalized online within a short span of time, was arrested when a fellow Syrian food deliverer rammed his car into the attacker. Our next report gets the details.
The southern Austrian town of Villach, in Carinthia province near the border with Italy and Slovenia, was caught unawares when a 23-year-old Syrian asylum seeker attacked passers-by with a folding knife. A 14-year-old boy was killed and 5 others were wounded in the stabbing that took place at 4 p.m. local time near the town's main square. 3 of the wounded are still in intensive care. Another Syrian man, a delivery worker, brought the carnage to an end by driving his vehicle at the attacker, preventing possible injuries. The suspect, believed to be a lone perpetrator, was detained at the scene and was subsequently charged with murder and attempted murder. The next day, addressing a news conference, Interior Minister Gerhard Kahner labeled the stabbing an Islamist attack.
It is an Islamist attack with IS connections, according to the current state of investigations. An Islamist attack with IS connections by an attacker who, according to the current state of investigations, apparently radicalized himself online within a short space of time.
Innerhalb kürzester Zeit sich offensichtlich, so der Stand der Ermittlungen.
Reportedly, an Islamic State group flag was found in the suspect's apartment, and according to the state police chief, the suspect had sworn allegiance to the group after a brief radicalization period. The suspect had a valid temporary residence permit and was waiting for a decision on his asylum and application. He, however, had no criminal record and had not attracted the attention of authorities previously. In subsequent days, the shocked residents of Villach were struggling to comprehend the rare tragedy to have befallen them.
For most of the people, it's a shock, I think. It's not the same thing than it was before. I did not think that it could be happening in this town, a peaceful town.
And I don't know how the city will react after this attack. For sure, what I can say is that I have no fear. What these terrorists want is to bring fear to the people, but I have no fear. They will never have us, and I'm sure that all the religion wouldn't accept this thing.
The Saturday stabbing attack has once again brought into focus the national debate over asylum laws, especially in the backdrop of an election last year in which the far-right Freedom Party came out on top for the first time ever. While Austria was still coming to terms with the shock and awe of the murder of a teenager, 5 days later, its northern neighbor, the Czech Republic, was jolted by a knife attack. 2 women, a shop assistant and another worker in the service area, were attacked by a 16-year-old teenager with a knife with a blade about 20 centimeters long in a shopping center on the outskirts of Hradec Králové, around 110 kilometers east of Prague. The teenager, a male Czech national, was detained approximately 10 minutes after the incident, less than a kilometer from the scene of the crime. The swift responding paramedics, however, failed to save the lives of both women despite their best efforts. In 2023, a Czech student had killed 14 people and wounded 25 others in a shooting rampage at the prestigious Charles University in capital Prague. Though terror attacks are a rarity in the Czech Republic, a European Union and NATO member nation of 10.9 million people, these recent attacks are surely a cause for concern.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of World at War. And if you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback or suggestions, please feel free to do so on the ID that you're seeing on your screens. I'm your host, Mohammed Saleh, and I'll see you again next week.